Good morning. It's good to see you this morning. Today I'm taking a few words from what becomes quite a long discourse between Jesus and the people that he had fed with bread. They'd been on the side, they'd been following him. He fed them. It's in John chapter 6. 5,000 of them he fed. And then they all went home. um, and Jesus went up a mountain, and the disciples started to go across the sea, and Jesus didn't get in the boat with them, and the people knew he hadn't got in the boat with them. There was not another boat that side of the lake, and they come finding Jesus to ask how he got across the lake. Of course, we know that he got across the lake by walking on it, by walking on the water. And they come to find him because they're puzzled. There was only one boat. They know Jesus didn't get into it. How on earth did he get across the lake? And instead of saying, well, I walked across the water, which perhaps you and I might have said, when they said to him, Rabbi, in verse 25 of chapter 6 of John, when did you come here? How did you get here? There was only one boat. Jesus answered them, truly, truly, I say to you, you seek me not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. Do not labor for the food that perishes, but for the food which endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give to you. For on him has God the Father set his seal. And they said to him, what must we do to be doing the works of God? And Jesus answered them, this is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent. And it's interesting what Jesus had said, because this reminds me of when he was talking to the woman at the well in chapter 4. His disciples came to find him and said, because they'd gone off into the villages to buy food, because they'd been traveling and everyone was hungry. And his disciples said to Jesus, Rabbi, eat. This is in John 4:31. He said to them, I have food to eat of which you do not know. So the disciples said to one another, has anyone brought him food? Jesus said to them, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. And remember, when Jesus was in the wilderness, he said, when he was asked by the devil to turn stones into bread because he'd been fasting, he said, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes out of the mouth of God. So we're talking about two kinds of food here. The natural food, which they were fed. The 5,000 were fed with loaves and fishes, and they had plenty to eat. And there's also talk about an inner feeding, a supernatural feeding that sustains us, even when we haven't eaten ordinary bread and fish. And Jesus experienced that himself, that renewing that came within him when he had been speaking with this woman and brought her to faith. He was no longer physically in need. Excuse me. Gosh, that caught me unawares. But this is so important, because these passages teach us that God is able, he's perfectly able to satisfy our physical needs. He doesn't have a problem about feeding you and I and keeping us fed. He has no problem about sustaining us and providing for us. But what he wants us to do is to spend our time Jesus says, do not labor for the food which perishes, but for the food which endures to eternal life. To make our priority, aiming for the sustenance, the food that comes from God on the spiritual level. And then Jesus, of course, later on in this passage, talks about being the bread of life. He who comes to me shall not hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. Jesus, the bread of life, not physical bread, spiritual bread, the sustenance of eternal life. Jesus is that sustenance. He is that food. His word and living for him gives us sustenance that is totally unlike the ordinary everyday bread that we eat. And we shouldn't focus totally, or we shouldn't focus. We're too materialistic. Let's put it this way. We're too focused, all of us, however far we've got on in our Christian life. We are focused of necessity on our physical needs. But our focus should be on Jesus. What is the work? What is the work? What must we do to do the works of God, they said. Jesus said, this is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent. That's the core thing. And he was saying it to these people who he'd fed. They were following him because they wanted to see more of his miracles. They weren't following him because they wanted to hear what he taught, and they wanted their lives changed, and they wanted to be his disciples. No, they were looking for the miraculous. And when he started to teach them radical truths about real life experience of God, they didn't want to know. They didn't want to know, and they couldn't grasp what he was trying to say, because they couldn't get past the knowledge of where he'd grown up and what family he'd come from. And they couldn't believe the things that he was saying. They couldn't accept it. And we are so fortunate. We are post the cross and the resurrection and the ascension of Jesus. So there's a much greater degree of understanding for us than we can't imagine what it was like for these people to hear the things that Jesus said that were so different to what they had been taught. And they found it really difficult. But this is so important. This is very important that, Jesus said it, didn't he, in Matthew, I think it's Matthew 6, when he was talking about the lilies of the field and the birds of the air, that we should seek first his righteousness. We should lay up treasures in heaven, not on the earth. We should be heavenly minded. We should be eternity minded. We should be Jesus minded, not materialistic minded. If your focus all the time is what you need to live your life, even if you are in dire straits physically, that should not be your focus, because your trust needs to be, your knowledge needs to be that whatever your circumstances, God will care for you. If you seek his kingdom first, that is his promise, and he keeps his promises. So back to the original text that I was quoting. Do not labour for the food which perishes, but for the food which endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give to you, for on him has God the Father set his seal. Jesus is the source of everything that we need. Everything we need has been given to us, has been promised to us, and is ours for the taking. But we need to get our priorities right. We need to get things in the right order. God first, others next, me last. Jesus first. Jesus, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Jesus, the one we follow, whatever the cost is, whatever the difficulties that come our way, because we are aligned with him and we have given him our allegiance. We work for him. We labour for the bread, the food that does not perish, but the food that endures to eternal life. Have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.